All right, everyone, now it's time for a big event you've all been waiting for, Tech Twitter Fight of the Week. Ladies and gentlemen, here to introduce this week's Tech Twitter Fight is the Primogen.
Our private variables evil!
Thank you, TJ. I don't even know what TJ just said. So there was a recent tweet by someone named Zach who was kind of poking fun at Andrew Kelly, creator of Zig, saying that he will not support private variables. Just sorry, Zig's not going to have private variables, the end. After this happened, Began did some little digging, and we did happen to find a video where Casey, you can barely see it on here, this is Casey from 10 years ago talking about private variables.
It's so good.
And he was just like, if you do this, getters and setters and private variables, you're fired. This is the second time today I've heard Casey talk about getting fired if you do something. And this is one of them. And so
We brought the receipts, baby. We brought the receipts.
Casey would have fired me so many times. It's crazy.
I think
so many
that's
getters, setters,
specifically about getters and setters, though.
That was about
less
getters and
private.
setters. Yeah. He's just like, with private, you have to do getters and setters. I'm going to fire you. But there was tweets from Ryan Fleury saying that private variables are an incredibly bad idea and you should basically never want to use them. Somebody else said the merchants of complexity, by the way, shout out DHH, want private variables. So you need to set and get member functions for every single variable. You can bloat the absolute F out of your code. Right?
I
So
believe
love
Bill
that.
Hall, too, right? Bill Hall, creator of Odin, agreed with Andrew in that thread.
Yep. Yes. Ginger Bill also said it. And then even the creator of Tiger Beetle, one of Zig's biggest projects, also said the reason why they use Zig is precisely the rationale behind these decisions. And then some people, some dissenters said that with quotes, I could add a single keyword to solve this entire problem, but no, you should instead carefully document each and every variable instead of just restricting the user from doing dumb shit. Also, getters and setters are an anti-pattern because I say so. Good luck managing duplicate state when you don't have the convenient tool to manage it because F you. And so people were getting very feisty in the thread, getting very, very upset. And Casey, you probably actually are one of the only ones in this group that actually have probably a more well-informed opinion, because I come from Java, where it's just a keyword, right? That's one of my first languages. And then in C, where it just didn't exist. And so I was just like structing and making everything public. And I never really quite understood the arguments until this thread. You kind of want to walk us a little bit through why private variables would be considered bad?
So it's worth noting that, like that video that you're talking about, I'm very anti-getters and setters, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. What I would say is I'm not as 100% anti-private as some of the people in that thread would be. So we'll talk about that maybe a little bit as well. But in general, so there's kind of two ways that you might approach the idea that you're giving someone some code that they're supposed to use, right? So, you know, when we're talking about private, what we're talking about is you're sort of giving something presumably to another programmer or to yourself in the future, and you're supposed to use some part of that, like an interface, like methods on it, or public variables that are in it. And you're sort of saying these other parts, they're kind of like implementation details that I'm worried either A, you will mistake how they work and they'll cause you bugs right now, which is one thing. So I don't want you to access them. And of course, that's what private does. It prevents anyone except the implementer of that particular object from accessing them. Or I don't think you'll make a mistake with them right now, but I might change how they're used in the future, and I don't want to like break what you've done with them by changing how they work, right? So that's really what private is doing, is it's saying there's this part of the thing that I don't really want you using for some reason. Either I don't think you can use it right now, or I don't think it will be maintained in the future, so there you go. And it's important to remember that it's like, this is not a thing that didn't already exist in other ways. So in C, the way that you do this is you just don't ship that piece, right? So you put in the header file like a bunch of functions that operate on some struct, and you just don't ship the struct. The struct is just blind. That's how you used to do it. In C++, they kind of decided, well, we've got all this stuff, like you have to derive from classes, and you might be the one deriving from the class, and all this other stuff, or we want to declare these on the stack in the local person space, and blah, 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 blah. So they were like, it would be nice if you could just have sort of that struct you didn't publish could still live in the header file. Now, for various reasons, this turned out to be a terrible idea, objectively, in my opinion, not because of the thing that's being argued about here, but because that pushed all the implementation details into header files, which means that you're compilation dependencies are now all based on the implementation of the class, not just the actual interface to the class, which massively exploded compile times, which led to books like Large Scale C++. There was like an emergency in the C++ community when this happened and people tried to do large scale. The compile times went through the roof. They're still through the roof today, by the way, but at least they've been mitigated somewhat, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, people are used to Rust now, so the compile times are so quick. You don't even have to worry about them.
So that's kind of where this comes from. And then people grow up with this, like most people who have been programming in C++ for a long time. They want to switch to something like Zig, let's say, because whatever reason, they've got some reason they want to switch to Zig. They go in there, or maybe they came from Java or somewhere else that inherited this kind of idea, pun intended. They want this feature because that's how they're used to constructing code. So they ask for the feature, they get told no, you get this thread. Nobody thinks about it for more than 5 seconds. They all reply, yes, it's great, no, it's terrible, and that's the end of the story. I think that's roughly where we're at. Is that a fair summary, everyone?
I like
Sure.
it so
Say
far.
so.
Yeah.
So I can give you Andrew Kelly's kind of motivation behind it all. So here's his exact reasoning. There are many properties that can be leaked into public interface of an API. For example, size and alignment of a struct, performance characteristics of a given function implementation, whether a function can be executed at comp time, existence, non-existence of declarations, and more. It is up to the documentation of a given package to specify what exactly the major version is protecting. That is, what exactly counts as breaking and what does not. Whether a given field is a part of the public API or not is one more item in the list. Of course, most of these have a general recommendations for defaults. It gives a whole bunch of stuff. The idea of private fields and getter and setter methods was popularized by Java, but is an anti-pattern. Fields are there. They exist. They are the data that underpins the abstraction. My recommendation is to name the fields carefully and leave them as part of the public API, carefully documenting what they do. A good example would be this, and he gives what a mutex is, effectively. Is a mutex has the unprotected counter underneath and all that kind of stuff. And so his argument is that it affects implementation details, and I think there's something called Hyrum's law, if I'm not mistaken. Hyrum's law effectively says like all the private implementation details become public features given enough time with the library.
Yeah.
Meaning that like people will actually care about how things are implemented because they eventually leak out. And so having things that are private ultimately expose behaviors to the public.
Trash, do you like private variables? I want to know.
I always found that private variables hindered me more than anything because I always end up being, oh man, I actually need to use this, so why can't I just have it? Especially if I was designing something, I was like, what should I make private? I've never had like a good use case. Like, yeah, I should hide this for whatever reason. So I'm not like a diehard on either side. I just know that I personally have never had a use case where I was like, that should be private, and that's the end of it. If anything, give me access to everything, and then I just use it as I please, and then hopefully that doesn't mess anything up. That's kind of just been my general approach and mindset there.
Yeah, I've had this thing where I think it's just due to the decade that I started programming in, which was like the Java peak, like the pinnacle of Java. And so I've always been like, oh, you got to hide all these things because people are going to abuse them. And now I'm just like, let them all free. If someone decides to start changing values, that's on them, right? Like, it's just not even on, like, what do you expect? What do you expect, people?
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like I will say it does feel right in some languages to have private variables. It feels like Zig, it would feel wrong. Zig feels like you're supposed to be in control of everything and like, come what may, right? In, say, like Rust, it does kind of feel right that you can hide stuff because it does feel like it breaks a lot of, for example, in Rust, part of the cool thing for a mutex is that you can't access the variable without getting the lock, right? That is like part of the nice thing about it, right? And if you had all things were public, you could just grab the value. So I don't know. I get like, I don't know. So maybe I'm just being a fence sitter. And I'm not having an opinion on it. But like in C or Zig or things like that, I'm like, heck no. There's bytes there. I want to be able to get to the bytes. You need to give them to me. But then in Rust, it kind of feels like, well, I'm already spending all day in the ivory tower. Like, I'm not going to let anyone else read my books. So I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just sitting on the fence though.
No, it's a potentially good point.
So like when I do like libraries internally at work, like we obviously expose some surface level API on like things you should use. But if you really want to get something, you can get to it, and it's not the end of the world. And if anything, you just end up, it's such a waste of like mind space to try to figure out what you should and shouldn't hide. I just think it's just like a waste of time, in my opinion. Until one day I'll have the use case. Until then, if I don't have the use case, I can't really argue for them.
I would say, like, broadly speaking, getters and setters are terrible. So there's like a thing that's like that I want to make sure people understand, which is that if you're just making everything private because you were told that that was a good idea, that's a really bad programming pattern.
Yeah.
And it is a good idea to say, like, that is not right. If you have data, you need to think about, should this data be exposed? And the answer is not that it always should be hidden. The answer is that once you've figured out how a system works, some data should be exposed, and that's crucial to making the system easy to use, performant, like simple would be like not overcomplicating it. All these things are important. So there is that, and it's important to keep that in the back of your head. However, there is also the fact that when you are making an API, you do want to have some way of delineating, like, just for mental clarity, like, hey, here's what we're using and what we're not using on the outside, right? Like, here's what the implementation and what's not. And so I do think maybe it's a little reductive to just say that, like, private, the whole concept is bad. Because I could see there being, like, a thing where it's like, okay, if you did want to have these kind of dual use things where it's like, okay, I kind of have beginner mode and expert mode usage of this struct. You know, if you were a Rust programmer, like I think Tej was sort of alluding to, if you're like a Rust programmer, I would think the consistent way of approaching that language would be that structs, you know, have their or any, whatever your record class is. They don't have to be called a struct, obviously, but like whatever you're talking about there can be partitioned. And then I can say that I have to open up a particular partition in order to work with it, just like how Rust has like unsafe, right? That would be consistent, like, in that language to do that. The other thing is, I don't think it's necessarily a great idea for a language designer to just dismiss the concern that people have about how to, like, mark this up idiomatically. It's not a bad, even if you didn't want it to prevent access, I could see you wanting an idiomatic markup system that isn't just, I don't know, I put a comment somewhere, right? Like, I don't really like the implementation of private in C++, me personally, but that doesn't mean I would be categorical. Like, I'd have to think about it more. Like, maybe there is a design where it's like, hey, here's the idiom for marking up what we do here. I'm not as like some of the people were super pro-private and super anti-private. I think I'm more with Tej on the fence sitting where I'm like, there is sort of a thing here. I haven't really seen it done particularly well in a language. I don't care about it very much because I prefer to, like, when I'm going to deliver an API like that, I want to completely separate it. If there's stuff you're not supposed to see, it's not going to be in there. That's not how we're going to do it, right? But I could imagine a language which made it possible, like almost I could declare them separately. Like, they are the same thing and will be fused in the struct because we need it to be on the stack or something like that, but they're declared separately so you don't even see them at all or something. Like, I don't know. I could imagine things that had this property. So I also wouldn't come down 100% on the anti-side.
I feel pulled in both directions for, like, for example, let's say you made something and originally it's like storage, you know, it had some internal private storage variable, right? And then that was originally like a list. And so someone was accessing that directly and they probably shouldn't, but it was fine. They were being careful, blah, blah, blah. And then later, like next version of the API, all of the public methods are still the same, but you've changed the internal storage type from list to like, maybe now it's like a tree or something. Maybe that was better. Or like it's some sort of try or something. I don't know. Like you have some other storage thing. Like on the one hand, it sucks that your code is now broken, right? Because you used the internal thing and now it's a different thing. Maybe it has different methods. So it's like annoying to upgrade. But at the same time, it's like maybe you want it to break because you made some assumption about how it worked before and then now it doesn't, right? So like that's kind of good that it breaks, right? So then it's okay that it's not private. You used the thing that you weren't supposed to. That's fine. You got to eat the upgrade cost when you upgrade again later because the assumptions changed in the internal representation. So I don't know. That makes me lean towards don't have private, especially for some of these other languages. But it feels wrong in Rust. It feels like I have to have it in Rust.
I would feel like my criticism of the pro-private people, the like strongly pro-private people who use some colorful language to describe Andrew Kelly in that thread. I would say that the pro-private people are also kind of like, they're not really paying attention to some of that the things that they're talking about with, like you just said, like the leakage of the implementation out, and they seem to be fine with that, right? It's
right.
like what about all of those things? It's like all you're really doing is preventing this one thing, but the rest of it, all of the other details, how big it is, all those sorts of things are leaking out, and those are all gonna change when you do this stuff, and you're fine with all of that, but just not this one, and you're so angry about it, and that did seem weird. So you know, I don't know. Like most things, this is a pretty specific topic, and I feel like the outrage was not necessarily warranted. If you want outrage, try installing some Node.js stuff. I would also point out, this is like something Andrew Kelly posted in like 2021. So this is like a necro thread too. Like they're like pulling this out after 4 years to complain about it and have a little party. And I feel like Andrew's reasoning was fine. Maybe I would have liked a language designer to think a little harder about like, okay, what is it that people actually wanted out of private? And is there like a new feature we could have that's better than private that would give them what they want? Maybe I would have liked that. But at the end of the day, like, it certainly wasn't as ridiculous as people were making it out to be. And so I thought it was really some pretty pathetic tech Twitter stuff there, because it really, like, it was a totally fine decision for this language. I don't know, man. Like, and it wasn't completely flippant. The post by Andrew was not like, you're an idiot and private is stupid. It was like, here's some reasons why we're not doing it, and right now we would recommend you do this other thing. That's just where we're at, right? So, like, I don't know. So I don't get the private stands. I'm not as on the anti-private side as some of the other people, but the private stands were out of control in that thread, in my opinion.
So, Casey, you would not classify yourself as a communist in this case. Like, it is not that everybody gets the variables necessarily, but it is like, so you're kind of like, I don't know, like a democratic socialist? Where would you put yourself on the spectrum for this of like the private ownership of variables?
Well, I mean, you know the answer to that question, since I like to do as much code as possible myself. I'm a dictator, right? It's a dictatorship. I wrote all the code.
Authoritarian right.
I have access
Respect.
to all the variables because I wrote all the code. And the citizens only get what I allow them to get. There's no, they don't even get to touch the code. They just run the executable. So that's
yes,
where we're
everything's private. I give
I'm
you
gonna call you,
everything's private or everything's public, however you want to look at it, but it's
Call you Private Casey. There you go.
Yeah.
Ryan Fleury, he did say that private variables are an incredibly bad idea. You should basically never want to use them. And see, wanting certain things to be private is a red flag to me.
And I think part of that,
I think he might be
comes...
misthinking them through the lens of getters and setters too.
He said in the chat, the updated take. For what it's worth, I agree with Casey's point. I was mostly thinking of getter setters data hiding by default in my tweet, which I thought about for about 2 seconds. Ryan, if you write another tweet again for 2 seconds, we are going to be posting you and publicly shaming on the stand.
Yeah.
So, you know,
True.
I will say that at the limit, you just want the ability for an API to also ship verification code, basically compile time code, which can verify things about the usage code, and that could be hooked up via markup.
And I would also point out that, like, C++ is the worst possible version of this feature.
Have
right?
so many
What do you
things.
mean, friend?
Yeah. Mutable and friend. And, like, they have all these things where they're like, well, here's the thing, and then we undid the thing, right? And by the way, you can't search for it, right? It's like someone just cast something, a castaway const, and then off it goes, right? And you can't figure out how many people might be touching it later. So anyway, so I do think also that's part of it, right? Is that your experience is going to be really colored by like those bad experiences. And so the only thing I was saying is like, I don't want to foreclose the possibility that there is a better version of private that's something else. So I don't want to say that like the ultimate language is just one where all of your variables are dangling in the breeze, right? It's not completely underwear free. Maybe there is an appropriate way to do that, but it's not what we have been doing. And so I agree with the anti-private crowd on that. I just don't know that I want to say like,
Oh,
I
so
have
what
a
we need is
question.
comrade classes, not
Comrade.
friend classes.
Comrade.
I got it. Okay, I'm following.
well, this is in the context of a language decision, right? So Zig has an opportunity to do something new here, and they chose to not investigate that and just say no. So I can see some criticism of that potentially, but it should have been more constructive criticism, not just like everyone is stupid for not having private or whatever. It's like, okay.
Casey, I have a question. What does Ryan mean when he says basically compile time code, which can verify things about the usage code? What does
I
that
think
mean?
what he's trying to say, I might be putting words in Ryan's mouth here, but my guess is if what you're concerned about is that someone is going to do something with these private variables, or variables you would have declared private, but we're saying we're not going to, right? That will violate some kind of future proofing or some kind of invariance. What we want is the ability to insert, like, you know, JAI style metaprogramming to find those things either during development. So like I have a vision in my head of here are some things I want to prevent event up front and I put those into the metaprogramming, or after the fact where it's like, oh crap, we thought this was always going to be an array, but it turned out it has to be a linked list now. We were going to make that change, and now we want our metaprogram to find all of the places where this is being used and warn the programmer and tell them to fix it, right? I imagine he's talking about one or the other of those or both. And Ryan
the
can
mutex
answer.
one could be like, you can't access this variable except it after in the same scope.
Exactly.
Grabbing the lock, for
Exactly.
example.
Like, did you grab the lock already, right? And so private is like a poor substitute for that, which is what you actually want. And I think Ryan's probably saying that. He's saying what you actually want is static analysis for the things that you care about. And since you're not getting that from C++, instead they just gave you this private thing, which is a very blunt thing. Because what about all your implementation code? It's not being checked at all, right? And that's not great. What we would rather have is all the code is checked. Your code, their code, everybody code goes through, the actual verification that we cared about, not just private.
So I think one thing that I really like is that if everything were public and you had the functions to manipulate that, and that's how things were done, is that there's often all these little use cases that you have that aren't quite as aligned with the library, and you have all the tools to go off-road when you need to go off-road. Yeah. And then for the rest of them, you're like, oh, standard operation, here's the struct, go ahead and do the standard struct, and then if I need to go off-road, I have the option to. And that's why I've always been a bit more pro on the make everything public side now, is that anytime I touch a property, I don't care if it's public or private, it always feels a bit weird versus when I like call a method for something. Hey, is that HTTP? Get that out of here. That's not how we order coffee. We order coffee via SSH, terminal.shop. Yeah, you want a real experience? You want real coffee? You want awesome subscriptions so you never have to remember again? Oh, you want exclusive blends with exclusive coffee and exclusive content? Then check out Cron. You don't know what SSH is? Well, maybe the coffee's not for you.
Terminal coffee in hand, live in the